Welcome to Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, the podcast that deals with all things mental health. We talk to professionals, survivors, and loved ones about their sometimes informative, sometimes uplifting, and sometimes tragic stories. I'm your host of the show, Todd Rennebaum, advocate, recovering addict, experienced sufferer of depression and anxiety, and author of the children's book, Sometimes Daddy Cries. Hello and welcome to another episode of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health. I am your host, Todd Rennebaum. Thank you for tuning in for another week. It's going to be another great episode. Before we get into the episode, I have a bit of a story and a bit of babbling to do. So if you're uninterested in my life and some of the things I've been up to, please feel free to skip ahead to the episode. So if you have been listening to the podcast, you might know that I have been waiting for a long time for an ADHD assessment. I've done one now, and I've been assessed, and it's been confirmed. I'm officially diagnosed with ADHD, and it was a wonderful phone call. I was quite happy. I got emotional more than once, just having that validation and finally a reason for a lot of the stuff I've been going through for the last 35 years or so, between addiction and depression and anxiety and suicide attempts and just not feeling like other people and all that kind of stuff. It's been quite the journey. I'm gonna try and get on some medication here and see how that works. I've talked to quite a few people that have been diagnosed as adults in the last little while here, and they say the medication is life-changing. So I look forward to seeing what happens. Yeah, it's nice to finally maybe be treating the cause and not symptoms, instead of treating anxiety and depression and addiction, actually be treating the cause of the anxiety, the addiction, and the depression. So yeah, life's pretty good. I'm very grateful. I have to say a huge thank you to LDAS, that's LDAS, the Learning Disability Association of Saskatchewan. It's a non-for-profit organization that has helped me through all of this. They've found funding for me to be able to get the assessment. Normally costs about $2,200, and the coaching, I'm not sure how much the coaching costs, but I've been seeing an ADHD coach for a while, and her name's Chelsea. She's amazing. LDAS, you're amazing. Psychologist I talked to and assessed me, her name is Erin. She's amazing. And her supervisor Brennan, he's amazing. Everyone's just amazing there. I can't stress enough how grateful I am to have been hooked up with LDAS and to meet all those wonderful people. If you follow me on social media at all, you may have seen the post of me talking about all this stuff already. And I just want to say thank you so much for everyone that's sent messages and responded and liked all my posts, all the support, all the wonderful comments and people reaching out to me over the last few days here about my diagnosis. I do want to read one person's comment. Her name is Lori Diamond. She's with Wholehearted Crystal Creations, and you can actually buy some of her artwork and some of her crystal kind of creations at wholeheartedcrystalcreations.ca, and she delivers and mails stuff all over the world. So if you're into crystals and creations, I suggest you follow her and buy one of her creations. Anyway, she writes, "Hi Todd, Lori Diamond here. Just want to say how inspired by you I am and how much I appreciate all the posts and dialogue around mental health and now ADHD. I was very lucky to be diagnosed at 18 years old, and I didn't start medication for the first time until 2 years ago, but it's been life-changing. Still haven't figured out how to manage sensory overstimulation, but always a work in progress. Haha. All the best for you moving forward, and looking forward to following your process if you wish to share. Take care." Thank you so much for that, Lori. I do appreciate that, and I appreciate everyone else's comments and people reaching out. So anyway, that's my little story about that. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Bunny Hugs Podcast. On TikTok, it's Bunny Hugs Podcast. And on Facebook, it's Bunny Hugs and Mental Health. And please, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please rate and review the podcast, and it's just a huge help. Oh, I also want to say hello to Melina. So hi Melina, thanks for listening and thanks for the support. Now, next week I am speaking with CC Chang. She's the founder and CEO of a company called ShareWell. And ShareWell is an online peer support website. There's 2 tier systems. You can do it for free, or you can pay, and if you pay, you get the full meal deal there. And it's basically any kind of peer support group you can think of, you can join. She has her own stories of mental health issues and why she started this company. And so we talked to her about that and about ShareWell. But now this week, I'm speaking with Louise Barnett. I believe it's Barnett, not Barnett. I'll say Barnett. Louise Barnett. She's a life and sobriety coach and a speaker. She has started her own podcast, which I believe has not yet started, but it comes out this week. So you can check her out at Together Sober Podcast. And she is just a lovely lady. She has gone through her own trials and tribulations with addiction, and she pulled herself up by her bootstraps, as they say, and she's now helping other people in addiction and as a life coach. So she has more than enough life experience to be able to help others, which I appreciate. You can also follow Louise on Instagram at Louise Barnett, and I will put all that stuff in the show notes, so you can go there and follow her. So without further ado, I give you Louise.
Oh my gosh. It is such a challenging and interesting question to be asked to share your story and when things began. And having done a significant amount of work over several decades, it's really impossible to tell your story without touching a little bit upon your childhood and your upbringing, because that is honestly, truly so much of what impacted so many decisions along the way. So for me, what was most impactful growing up as a child, I am first generation American. My parents immigrated from Zimbabwe in the late 70s. And part of them coming to the United States is that they were both newly converts of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as Mormonism. And so that was sort of one of the reasons, of many, education being number one, but one of the reasons that they came to the States. And growing up, I grew up on the East Coast. So you may have thought, oh, Utah, but nope, I grew up all along the East Coast, kind of moving up and down, constantly transplanted due to my father's career growing. And what that meant was I was raised by immigrants, raised as a Mormon without roots being set down. And really, I viewed myself for all of my life as an outsider. I felt like I never belonged to a community from a very, very young age. And that applied to my physical surroundings where I lived, because we were constantly moving around, but it also applied to the religion. The religion from an extremely young age was something that I just never subscribed to. I resisted. I kind of kicked and screamed every Sunday morning, which then in turn meant that I also felt an outsider to my family, because my 2 sisters and my parents at the time all were believers and actively participating in the religion. So that was something to me just very young that set roots in me that I didn't belong, and really kind of set forth that conversation about maybe some attachment issues and feeling a sense of emotional abandonment. Even though I had very loving and caring parents, I just didn't belong. And my first sort of act of rebellion, if you will, was when I was probably 12 or 13 and we were in middle school, and we would get out of school and we'd walk into the town and go buy penny candy and, dating myself here. Yes, it existed. It's a thing. And I remember my girlfriends wanted to go get a Starbucks. They wanted to go get a coffee. And that was that first moment of what I now know very well as cognitive dissonance. I, experienced, a belief that had been ingrained in my mind, in my head, that coffee or caffeine is not to be consumed as far as the Mormon religion. But then I also wanted to fit in. I wanted to be part of a community. I wanted to be part of a group of people. And I actually don't remember whether I bought the coffee or not. It doesn't matter. What I do remember was going home that day and running upstairs to my room and grabbing all of the doctrine of the Mormon faith. So Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price, and the Bible. And I scoured that thing to try to provide me with some kind of concrete answer as to why. Why can I not have this cup of coffee? Why do I have to be different, right? Why am I on the outside? And I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anything. For my high school years, we moved again. So I was doing really well in my middle school years. I had found a community in the local theater group and had sort of was really building my own family. And we had to move again. We moved to Rhode Island from Massachusetts, and I started a new school. It was a school that it's a private school. So sort of the culture is that everybody's been together since preschool days and, have kind of grown up together. So once again, I felt myself really being thrown into this foreign environment where, again, I struggled to find my identity and where I belonged. So I started really, really resisting my parents at this stage. I'm, about 15 years old at this stage, and started the first major struggle for me was on the mental health side of things, where I, for my sophomore year of high school, struggled with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, self-harm, anorexia, and it all came on like a hurricane. I've disassociated still some of these memories, so they're a bit fuzzy, but what I do remember is going from feeling normal-ish to just this hurricane of emotions and feelings that I could not handle. My parents didn't have experience with this. They didn't know what to do, but they were smart enough and had the resources and were able to provide me with professional help and professional care, which I'm incredibly grateful for. The therapist that I saw back then, her first name is Kathy, and I've actually been in touch with her as recent as a few months ago. So she was extremely impactful in my life. But during this time of therapy, and self-harm and eating disorders and all of these very scary things for a young person of my age and for unfamiliar parents to kind of be dealing with, my parents at one point went into my room and broke my privacy and started reading some of the journaling that I had done. Journaling has always been, and to this day, is a huge part of my recovery. Writing, whether it's factual, whether it's fiction, whether it's creative or a mix of both, has always been just such a huge part of my recovery. And my parents read some things that were very disconcerting to them, along the lines of suicidal ideation, and the self-harm was something that they weren't aware of. And so they made the decision to break off the relationship temporarily with my relationship with my therapist and send me to Utah to stay for a summer with a family that we had known growing up, but they relocated to Utah. This trip, this summer, this experience is pivotal for me. It was, in a period where arguably I needed my parents the most. I essentially felt shunned and sent away from my family unit to stay with this family. And my therapist was ripped away from me. This was a Mormon practicing family as well. And unfortunately, in that summer, I was a victim of sexual assault. Up until this time, I had not touched even a drop of alcohol, no drugs. I had a boyfriend in Rhode Island, and we had kind of experimented with some sexual activity, but I was still technically a virgin when I went to Utah. And I came home from that trip, and make no mistake about it, very actively chose to change everything about who I was.
How long were you gone for?
A summer. So maybe 8 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks. And they were a family I knew growing up. And so it was I left with hatred towards the religion. I left with hatred towards anybody that behaved even minutely hypocritical, because what I experienced to me was, the peak of hypocrisy.
Yeah. If what you needed was your parents and therapy, but they did probably the worst possible decision was to send you away.
Yeah.
Away from the things that were helping.
Yeah.
And made it worse by, with the sexual assault.
Yeah.
And isolating you and making you, no one can make you feel something, but you felt shunned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I'm 40, so this is 25 years later or so, but I have since come to realize that actually it was Kathy who I spoke with in my adult years, and I was trying to piece some pieces together. And she said, your parents were doing the best they could with the tools that they had. So in their minds, and I do believe this to be true, they were acting from a place of love, but simply didn't have the tools needed to support what I needed. And I'm going to get on my soapbox, and I won't sidebar for too long, but this is why we're having these conversations, right? Like, this is why we need to talk about this stuff, so that parents, I might deal with this. I have a 9-year-old, right? So I need to be as well equipped as possible with the best tools possible to be able to support those that I love. So, would they have done things differently today? Probably, right? But they did the best they could. So,
but at the time,
exactly. Yeah. So I got back from Utah just with so much hatred in my heart for Mormonism, for my parents, for my family. My sister was I'm in the middle of 3 girls. So if you know anything about birth order, black sheep, and the first child is the perfect child, yada, yada, yada. So I just had hatred for everybody. And I very actively wanted to become somebody that belonged. So I had a boyfriend. I broke up with him. I started dressing a certain way, a little bit more provocatively, started wearing makeup. I found a new boyfriend. He was a year older, he was a senior captain of the basketball team, popular guy kind of thing. I started hanging out with the popular girls, so to speak. And, before you knew it, we were drinking vodka and Kool-Aid on the lawn, waiting to go to biology class, and on the weekends, tripping on mushrooms. So I kind of went, as far as the substance use goes, from 0 to 100, very deliberately. I take ownership that it was extremely deliberate, my entry into the world of alcohol and drugs. Really, when I went off to college, I went to Skidmore College in upstate New York, which has any college has a big drinking culture. And then it also has a really big marijuana culture and kind of psychedelics and that kind of culture. So I like to say that I went to college and really rinsed and repeated this kind of behavior. I added a touch of or, not a touch, but I disrespected my body in more ways possible in my college years. Whether it was the professor or, the young freshman, or it didn't matter. It was, I now know sort of why, but it was a piece of my self-destructive behavior that at the time I thought made me feel wanted or cared for or loved. And because I didn't love myself. By the time I went to college, I just had zero self-respect for myself. And at this stage was numbing what I didn't know at the time, but I was numbing for sure. I did graduate cum laude. So I did a few things right in 4 years. I like to say I graduated, with a piece of paper and no vision for my future. I graduated with the job title of waitress and, really had no desire to find a future for myself.
What did you take? What did you graduate with?
So I had a theater degree. So I fell in love with theater at a very young age and stayed involved in the theater community in undergraduate and also the fine arts. I found ceramics, and that was pre-recovery. Now that I look back, that was a true happy place for me. Was that creative outlet, which was really special. After college, my erratic behavior sort of started to get a bit more erratic. And I would make kind of very impulsive decisions. I ordered a dog online overnight. I would kind of go on these, weeks on end long benders. At this point, I'm heavy into cocaine. I even dabbled in crack, hanging around with horrible, horrible human beings, really in a dark, dark place, but felt stuck because I was so far down that it was in my mind, it was impossible for me to share anything with my family, which were really the only people who loved me, because I really made no real relationships in college, right? They were just all either drinking buddies or drug buddies or what have you. So I left alone again, and then very actively kind of attached myself to another community of people that were really dangerous. And I experienced and saw a lot of really, really horrible things. And it's important to note here, I say a lot, it's Jim Rohn's quote, but we're the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. And that's such a beautiful thought as we think about it as surrounding ourselves by positive influences and who we want to be. But be very careful because it works in reverse too, right? So I very actively surrounded myself by, in theory, 5 people, and I became those 5 people, right? But it was the drugging and the drinking and the sexing and the darkness and no money and all these things, just very erratic behavior. I got married. That was another erratic decision that I made. So I'm painting the picture here for what's coming down the line. I ended up on a whim deciding to move from Rhode Island to Maryland because as many people in active addiction we'll try to change our environment, because if we can change our environment, then maybe that means we can have a fresh start and we can fix everything and all the bad stuff will go away. And I got to Annapolis, Maryland. I got a job. I had also somehow managed to get an MBA through this time. So I'm very high functioning. And the MBA was a kind of the first thing in my life that I felt really proud of. I did it completely by myself. I was really successful with it. I was surrounded by, in the times I was in class, by people that were positive influences. And I graduated with something that most people don't have. But I still had no vision. I still had no idea where things were going. I just kind of went to Annapolis and did what I did best. I continued kind of partying and happy hours and just kind of dating around.
Did getting your MBA help you not think you had a problem? Because you're like, well, if I'm able to get my MBA, then obviously I'm fine because I don't have a problem because I'm able to do this wonderful accomplishment.
Yep. It's a great question. And it's so common because you can justify your addictions, right? And at the time, I was probably saying cocaine was helping me get my degree, right? It was keeping me awake, exactly. It was keeping me alert. And, up until the day I got sober, I was high functioning. I grew my career to great lengths before I got sober. And it's scary because there are these stigmas around what it means to do cocaine, to smoke crack, to drink too much, all these things. You don't need, I don't have a DWI. I never went to jail. I've never had a single encounter with the law, right? I've never been homeless, all of these things. But I was struggling for most of my life, 20 years, right? Most of my life, I was immensely struggling. And it led me to a night in Annapolis, Maryland, where I had just moved into a new apartment and it was completely empty. There was no furniture. It was kind of walls are echoing kind of thing. It was December 21st, the winter equinox of 2012. I will never forget this moment. I'm sitting on a mattress on the floor, kind of staring out the window. There's a full moon and tears are just like streaming down my face because I've just stared down at two blue lines on a blue stick. And so I was now single and pregnant and an addict.
You were with the father still at this point?
He was not a relationship that I was in.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So he was somebody that I knew from work and through my erratic behavior, fell in love in a 24-hour period of time and, kind of painted this whole fantasy.
So you were no longer married though?
No.
Okay.
Or separated, not legally, but.
And I have to know.
Semantics, yes.
The dog you ordered online, did you still have the dog?
The dog died after 4 years. Tragically, she died. She made it to Annapolis and I woke up one morning and she was seizuring and she was gone that night. She's a black Maltese poodle. That would have been 2012. And I'm turning 40 this year. And so my 40th this year, we already got it. It's a bit early, but we have a black Maltese poodle. So things have come full circle with the puppy love.
I knew there was some significance with that dog somehow.
There's significance with the dog. She was reincarnated. She 100% was reincarnated.
Okay. So now you're alone, sitting on a mattress, pregnant, crying.
Yep.
That's the only furniture in the whole apartment.
Yep. I found out December. Yep. I told the guy that we weren't going to be a thing. And he made his choice to physically remove himself from the situation. I waited until January to tell my parents, at which point they stopped talking to me. And so I ended up getting a roommate for the majority of my pregnancy, which was just really uncomfortable and not something I wanted to do. And it was a dude. I did stay sober through my pregnancy. At this point, I had nixed the hard drugs and was pretty much just drinking by the time I had moved to Annapolis. And I did stay sober through my pregnancy, had the baby. My mom and I had healed somewhat some of our relationships. So she was there for the birth of Annabelle. And I did really well for 8 months. As a newborn mom or as a new mom and not a newborn mom, a new mom. I started to grow my career in hotels. So I managed to actually get a pretty decent job working in hotel sales halfway through my pregnancy and maintained that job. And then April of that year, so she was born in August, so she's about 8 months. I was sent to a training in Houston, like a sales training for hotel sales people. And I went to that and fell madly in love with a man. By July, we were driving across the country from Annapolis to Dallas, where he lived, to start my new life. That story is a story in and of itself. So I won't go into the details of that, but suffice it to say that despite many red flags, this man was obviously not the right man for me, but a severely dangerous human being. And I put myself in a situation, and I put my 8-month-old daughter in a situation that was not safe. He has a record. He does have several DWIs with children in the car. He is mentally unstable. And we moved the last week of July, and by August 26th, he was already in jail. And I knew I had to get out of there. I knew my life was over, and Annabelle's life would never begin if I stayed. I called my mom, which at this point in my life is very hard to ask anybody for help, because I've kind of painted this picture for myself that I'm just basically the fuck up, right? And so I remember I called her.
No swearing on here.
Oh, sorry.
I'm kidding.
I'm usually pretty good.
Swear all you want. Hi, just a quick little break here to tell you about another great episode of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, episode 14 with Braden Crawford. Braden is a gay man who grew up in the Mormon Church. We discuss his struggles with growing up in the Mormon Church as a gay male, the trauma it caused, and the effect it had on his mental health. We also talk about pressures and some common struggles within the LGBTQ community. So please check that out. It is episode 14, and it's another good one. All right, back to this episode. Was this guy, was he in hotel sales as well?
He was. So we kind of were both sent to the same training by our respective hotels and met there.
So you called your mom?
Called my mom. 6:00 in the morning, whatever day of the week. It was February at this point. And she said to me on the phone, well, Louise, there's always women's shelters that you can go to. So that was a message loud and clear that I needed to figure this out. You know, I believe very strongly in finding gratitude in everything and changing your perspective on everything. So you can imagine that comment stuck with me for years and really festered within me for years. But since then, I know without a shadow of a doubt that I needed to hear that to get myself to the next step of where I needed to be.
If she would have bailed you out, do you think your patterns would have just kept going?
Who knows? And they did keep going for a while. I mean, this didn't change everything. Pregnancy clearly didn't change everything. But this is when I learned to be scrappy. This is when I learned to be resourceful. This is when I learned that if I want something or I need something, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get it. And I did. So I had let my credit score run literally in the gutter because of this individual. I literally had nothing. I had spent all my money to get to Dallas. All I had was my job. So I was smart enough to know I needed to keep that. And I remember that very day I called in sick and I drove around Dallas until I found an apartment that would take my credit score. It was in a really horrible neighborhood. We would hear gunshots like almost daily. And until I could find a daycare that I could even think about affording. And I did. And so we lived in that apartment for a while, and it was probably another 8 months later that I really needed help again. and it was my mental health. I didn't see any future for myself. I didn't know how I was going to continue living. It was really hard. Those years were the hardest of my life. From a substance abuse standpoint, those were the years where drinking went from a fun socializing, go out with the work crew for happy hour to go out with the work crew for a glass of wine and then go home and drink two bottles. So very, very distinct shift to closeted addictive behaviors. And I didn't want to be here anymore. So by none other than the grace of God, I don't know what, but my father flew out. They had since moved back to South Africa. So my father flew out to take care of Annabelle, and I checked myself into an inpatient facility, psychiatric. I had done some prior for eating disorders, but this was the first for psychiatric. I don't remember it. What I do remember is a doctor listening to me, a doctor just sitting there, keeping her mouth shut and just listening to me. She gave me medicine. She gave me a new medicine that I had never been on before. And I woke up the next morning in the inpatient facility and there was sunshine, literal sunshine, and figurative in my life. And the drug was lithium. The diagnosis was bipolar 1 and borderline personality disorder. I continued for several years after this making reckless decisions with my drinking and with my alcohol, but that diagnosis changed my life.
So you would drink on lithium?
Yeah, I drank from 2015 to 2019 on lithium. And I had a hospital visit once and just, not good situation. But I will say, when there is a mental illness or a brain illness or a mental disorder, however you want to define it or call it or identify, and you did not know your whole life why you were behaving in certain ways or making certain decisions, or why you wouldn't sleep for weeks at a time and go out on these crazy benders and buy dogs and get married and, do all of these quote unquote crazy things. And you finally have a healthcare provider listen to you and hear you, not just listen, but hear you and hear your story and make an educated diagnosis based on what you've shared, right? There's no blood test for this. To feel heard for the first time in my life is something I'm forever grateful for. And while I still take ownership of a lot of my behaviors and a lot of what I've done over the past 20 years, it gives me some peace to know that there's other things at play here. There's other things going on, and that I don't always have to be like this. So 2018, I did meet a man. I met a man in the right way.
Still drinking though.
Still drinking. Yes. Still very much drinking. At this point, I use the phrase cognitive dissonance. At this point, there was very much some awareness that without admitting it, I had a problem. I needed to change what I was doing. It wasn't working. But to your point earlier, I'm now a global director of sales for Hilton, right? I'm working for a Fortune 100 company. I'm flying to London, France, Vegas, San Francisco, you name it. I'm doing something right here. So again, it's not all kind of clicking, and I justify it because of the culture that I was surrounding myself with, the hospitality culture. So I met a man and we started dating. We took our time there, but what I did notice within the first 6 months of dating him is that alcohol wasn't a thing for him. I would almost have to pressure him to drink, right? Why aren't you drinking? It's the Cowboys game. It's this, it's that. And it wasn't important to him. And so what that did was force me he didn't do it. He never said a word to me about my drinking, but it forced me to put a mirror to my own face and to really say, Louise, what are you doing here? And even more so when we moved in together knowing we were going to get married. Annabelle's not getting any younger at this stage. And so at this stage, I was tormented by the thoughts in my mind. And this is the cycle of doom. So many people know it. You wake up in the morning hating yourself, telling yourself you're not going to drink that day. By 5 o'clock, you're pouring yourself a glass of wine and getting in a fight with your spouse and barely saying goodnight to your daughter, passing out and doing the same thing over, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. So this is what I was doing. And my new relationship that I knew was healthy and rock solid and my future, I saw crumbling in front of me, right in front of my eyes, because I knew it wouldn't sustain. So I actually went on a quest without a destination, meaning I didn't set out to get sober. I didn't set out with a specific goal, with a specific destination. I set out with a feeling of feeling lost, broken, scared of the unknown. I picked up a book. I listened to a podcast. I dove into journaling. I'm still working with a therapist and a psychiatrist. And I built my village, right, of those 5 that we talked about earlier. And I drowned myself in these resources. Because if I can get an MBA and if I can grow my career the way that I did, sure as hell can I dive myself into personal development and change who I am. And within 6 months of this journey, alcohol simply wasn't important to me. And another, month or so later, I declared it for good, my sobriety for good. Through that, have uncovered, my passion project. And ultimately, after actually doing some internal work with Hilton on the addiction side and the mental health side, I ultimately gracefully parted ways with the industry and have been out on my own ever since.
So as a
life coach, yeah, and I do a lot of public speaking as well. So life coach, sobriety coach, and public speaker. So
is a sober coach and a life coach, was that different?
So
did you actually have to get training for either, or is it just?
Yeah, so I did. You don't have to. But I did choose to. That was important to me. And that was part of my personal growth journey as well. So one of my first influencers that I really was attracted to is Jay Shetty. If you don't know Jay Shetty, he's most famous for his book, Think Like a Monk. He's got a great podcast on purpose, and he has a coaching school. He served 3 years as a monk. And so I received my certification from the Jay Shetty coaching school.
Both the life and the...
Life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Sobriety comes from the School of Hard Knocks. I got a lot of experience there.
So I went through addiction treatment as well, and I was introduced to the 12-step programs and AA and NA and stuff. Have you done any meetings like that? That's not, or is that not quite the path you went, I guess?
Yeah, so it's not the path I went. I have attended some. I will honestly say more from a research standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that path didn't make the most sense because for me, I don't believe I'm powerless. And I want alcohol to be the smallest thing in my life. I don't want it to be the biggest thing in my life. And so for me, so much of it has great value and I resonate with so many of the steps, but overall for me, and I think the religion piece, makes sense coming from my upbringing. I've got kind of a big question mark about that. And so
it's not religious, it's spiritual.
It's spiritual. Have they changed? Okay.
It's not religious. Yeah.
But I know so many dear people to me that work the program and go through the steps, and it is changing so many lives. And so there's incredible value there.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, it doesn't matter how someone gets sober.
100%.
And if 12 steps works for you, great. If whatever, or if it's harm reduction, whatever helps. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So now you're helping people.
Yeah.
That's step 12.
That's step 12. Yep, I made it.
So
Yeah.
what are some of the tools you give people to I guess become sober, or kind of, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. No, I do. I do. So many of us stem from personal experience. And one of the things that I've noticed over the past couple of years in the sobriety community, which is huge, but it's also extremely tight knit. And one of the things that I first noticed that started to really break my heart was this idea of individuals wanting it so badly. And so you see, or I would speak to individuals maybe saying, I'm going to try sober October. I'm going to try dry January. I'm going to do a 30-day reset, a 100-day reset, whatever it is, right? And what ends up happening a good majority of the time on day 31, at the end of the month, at the end of the reset, is what?
Let's get pissed.
Let's get drunk. So that started to stick out to me as a pattern that I was seeing in our industry, in our sobriety industry, let's call it, of something that was not working, right? People are so desperately trying to get sober. And so they're willing to try anything, but what they're trying isn't working. And the reason it's not working is because they're not changing the systems that along the process, along the way. They're just jumping the gun and going for the end result. So if I said at the beginning of my journey, I'm going to get sober tomorrow, well, I'm going to fail because I haven't done anything, A, to change my systems, to change my process, and B, to understand why, to get to the root cause. So on the sobriety side, I almost consider myself like a functional sobriety coach, along the same thought process as a functional medicine doctor, because it does nothing to treat the symptom, right? If the symptom is drinking too much, just stop drinking. It's not going to work in the long term. If we can get to the root and to the why as to why these people are making the decisions they're making, right? Which is exactly what I did. And to understand that, and it takes time on the front end, but then once you've done that work, by the time you're ready to take action against alcohol, you've set yourself up for long-term success.
Mm-hmm. In AA, we call that a dry drunk, or
dry drunk.
You're dry, but you're not sober. Being sober is having serenity and all that stuff. Whereas just not drinking is just not drinking. You haven't done anything. You just stopped drinking.
You just stop drinking. Exactly. And, this is where you also can see different types of motivators, right? So you can be motivated by fear. You can be motivated by love. You can be motivated by results. And if, the results driven fear is simply that 30 days, right? I want to complete the 30 days. And it really will not stand much longer than the 30 days. Duty is another one, right? So you might say, or fear is the second one. So fear might be like a health concern, right? Maybe you got your liver checked, things aren't looking so good. So you've got some fear-based motivation to change your ways. That might last a little bit longer. Now you've got duty. Okay, this is the one that truly breaks my heart. The people right now that are saying, I want to get sober for my husband. I want to get sober for my daughter, for my son, right? That is a duty-based fear. And while it might last you many, many, many even years, it is not lasting change. And that's where we start to see these individuals. Oh my gosh, did you hear about John? He was sober for, 10 years. He fell off the wagon. He had not found the motivator based in love. And the motivator based in love comes from one person and one person alone, and that's yourself.
Oh, I thought you were going to say your mom. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, when I was in treatment, I met all types of people that were there for themselves.
Yeah.
And I also met a lot of people who were there to save their marriage, to keep their job, because, someone told them they needed to. And generally the most successful people were the ones that were there for themselves.
Yeah. And my husband was smart enough to know not once, and he saw a lot of bad behavior. Not once did he ever ask me or tell me to quit, cut back, anything, because he was smart enough. He knew.
Mm-hmm. I mean, my wife kind of gave me an ultimatum, but it's a fine line, right? I didn't get sober for her. I got sober for me, but it was kind of the maybe the rock bottom or the slap upside the head that really I needed.
Yeah.
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 But ultimately, it wasn't like because I wanted to keep my family and keep my marriage. I did it, but
yeah, and that's part of it, right? And not to take away value from the importance of family or some of those duty-based motivators, but you have to have the love piece too.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to say actually. Maybe it was duty based for the first few months, but then as I was getting into it, I was like, oh, I actually like this. I want this for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the journey, right? Because, I'll be honest, like I've done a lot of dry Januaries in my day, right? So it does. And that's why we call it a journey, because it has its ebbs and flows, and everybody's is so uniquely different and beautiful. So.
I sat in on one of your presentations, I guess. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, we did a webinar.
Webinar, there you go.
Yeah.
And it was really about kind of mentally preparing yourself to get sober.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair to say? It's like you almost have to like prepare. Okay, these are the steps we're going to take. It's like you have to get into that mindset of change before you can even step into change.
Yeah, exactly. People think I'm crazy because one of the programs that I'll do with them, it's offered as either like a 6-week boot camp or a 30-day, but I don't want you to change anything about what you're doing. I want you to be exactly who you are in this moment of time, because we're trying to build awareness. We're trying to get a bird's eye view of who we are and what we're dealing with right now. Because, I could say, go to my kitchen right now and like bake me a cake, right? But if I haven't told you what ingredients you're working with, how are you supposed to begin that process? And so for me, what I took 6 months to do was literally just to understand who I am, what's going on, what are my decisions costing me in the past, what are they costing me today, what are they costing me in the future, asking these hard questions and starting to just gain, yes, self-awareness, but what I consider emotional intelligence. Because once you've built up the emotional intelligence and mental toughness, then you have the ability to start implementing action and making change. So I don't recommend people start to take quote unquote action before they've done this work. And it's a lifelong process, right? I hope to the day I die, I'm still and always working on myself and working on these things. But I just want people to give themselves a foundation before they try something so incredibly hard. Finding sobriety is not easy.
No, it isn't. I know. It's a lot more than just stop using.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was lucky enough. Like I had mental health issues too, but I was also an addict. So I was lucky that I was able to see like therapists and stuff and kind of do some of the pre-work, I guess. I was ready to dive in to do the hard stuff. I was ready to talk about the really gritty, dirty stuff, and some people aren't when they try to get sober the first time. Some don't even realize it's going to be like that.
Yeah.
Some people are just shamed. Like they think they're bad people. They've gone to jail. Their parents tell them, you're worthless. I'm tired of bailing you out, blah, 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 blah. And little do they know there's a lot of work on trauma that they have to deal with before they even have a real fighting chance to get sober.
Yeah, absolutely. Trauma, shame. And that's, I think, what we were talking about when we connected on the webinar, was just this idea of limiting beliefs. And if we can understand that so many of these beliefs actually were imprinted on us as children, whether it was a parent, whether it was a school friend, a teacher, what have you, again, that releases some of the responsibility. And it also helps to create that awareness and understand the why. Why do I have this belief about myself? Which leads to lasting change. If we understand the limiting beliefs, then we can start to take action on them, not against our sobriety, but action in ways of building self-confidence, following through, being the type of person that goes the extra mile, taking action in that sense. And if we do that, we end up building self-confidence by definition if we're taking these actions. And self-confidence is by definition what squashes the limiting beliefs. And if we can squash the limiting beliefs, we're putting ourselves in a place of strength as we tackle our sobriety.
And love, and then with that love, then you push away the what did you call them again? Like, I'm doing it for my parents, I'm doing it for whatever.
Oh, the motivators. Yeah.
So then you push away the motivators, and you're doing it for yourself more and more. The more confidence you get, the more self-love you get, the more.
Yeah, because you're so right. I mean, at this stage and everybody's story is different, so I don't want to assume, but for me, by the time I was ready to tackle my sobriety or my addictions, my self-worth and self-love didn't exist, right? Because you're right, because of all these behaviors, why would I think anybody would love me or understand me or be okay with my past? I hid so much of my past. Now I'm loud and I'm on every loudspeaker out there about it, but for years, people didn't know how my daughter was born, how she came into this world, knew nothing about my addictions, knew nothing about my mental health. I never told a single boss about my mental health for fear of being rejected and not accepted.
Mm-hmm. We actually have a similar story. I never got pregnant, but...
You men have it so easy.
But it all started off with partying and stuff, and there's some childhood trauma in that, and then it turned into just me getting drunk and high in my garage every night by myself. Like, the party was over, and it was just more of a necessity, and my mental health was declining, and I haven't been diagnosed with anything other than chronic anxiety and depression. I'm waiting for an ADHD assessment.
Yep.
I think my listeners are tired of me saying that, because I've been saying it since March.
I know the process takes a lot of patience. It does. It's not a quick one.
Yeah. So by the time I was sitting in, like, when I was partying, it was fun, but when I was sitting in my garage getting drunk and high and suicidal every night, it was just complete and utter shame. Yeah. And it was just like, because I would sit and ferment on the crappy crap I did in my past, things I did to my family, to my wife, and whatever. And I was like, no one else was doing that.
Yeah.
People knew about it, and people had. I think they had already forgiven me without me even asking forgiveness, but I hadn't forgiven myself, and so I was, this cycle every night, like I said, was just like, wake up, do it again, rinse, lather, repeat, and. Yeah, it's powerful.
And then you add it is a physically addictive substance, right? So there's the mental piece that is arguably harder to get through, but let's also give ourselves some grace. Like, we're dealing with addictive substances, physically addictive substances, and which can be very dangerous to let go of as well.
Yeah, I remember trying. So there's a thing called the Valley Chart. Right. And there's different things that you do. And the more you do them, the more you're going down the valley. And one of them is relocating, like you said. For me, it was like changing how I drank or how I smoked or whatever. Yeah. And so it was like, okay, no more hard stuff. I'll only drink beer.
Yep. Just like, the line. Okay.
Yeah. So then I drank a lot of beer. It's like, that didn't help at all. I'll only drink by myself. Well, I drank by myself every night. And one way to try to stop the marijuana use was my dealer at the time went on holidays for a few weeks, and I ran out of marijuana, and I was like, okay, that's it. I can't buy anymore. This is, my hands are tied. That lasted 6 hours. I made phone calls, texts. Oh God. I drove 2 hours, like, I did anything I could. And I was like, that was the day where I was like, okay, maybe marijuana isn't helping my anxiety.
Yeah.
maybe it's the cause.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually dying to listen to Andrew Huberman just dropped. So a couple weeks ago, he dropped his alcohol episode and the effects of alcohol on the brain. Maybe we can put this in the show notes because it is brilliant. And then just I guess yesterday, Monday, he dropped the marijuana and its effects on the brain. And I'm dying to listen to it. I haven't had a chance yet.
Well, that's something in treatment that I found super helpful was the effects of the brain and like the whole biology of addiction and stuff, because I could catch myself in that phase. It's like, oh, I'm in this point right now and this is what my brain's doing and this is why my brain's doing it, and so it's like, I can shut this down right now if I want.
If you understand, like, you sit in a state of suffering if you don't understand why. So your state of suffering is just that cycle of doom that both of us have experienced. So many of us have experienced, and we just kind of keep rinsing and repeating that cycle. Once we start to understand why and what's happening in our brain, in our body, in our mind, why we're going through this cycle, because there's a reason so many of us are, right? It really makes it that much easier to move forward. And, for me, I do have that kind of type A, very organized brain. I need, remember my Bible story. I was searching the Bible for a reason why I couldn't have a Starbucks. So to understand the physical why is a huge piece, huge.
And it takes away all the shame and takes away all the judgment too. It's just, this is biologically what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah. Your body is craving dopamine. It wants a dopamine hit because you've been giving it dopamine hits every single night at 5 o'clock. So at 4:30, it starts thinking about that dopamine hit.
Exactly. And neurotransmitters and things. I can't remember exactly the biology.
Yes, they're powerful.
It helped at the time.
They are powerful, and there are so many ways that we can start replacing, because sometimes in sobriety, ultimately we just want to change our process, right, to ultimately nix the habit. But arguably there is a stage for habit change where in addiction, especially, where it is appropriate to substitute behaviors for a short period of time, right? So if we can do a 5-minute, so my craving was 5 o'clock. That was very common for me. And so I started in my journey doing like a 5-minute meditation at 4:30 to, what am I doing? I'm releasing certain neurotransmitters in my brain, the same ones that my body's craving from the alcohol. So I'm kind of replacing that habit. And meditation is still part of my daily practice, but it's not right at that kind of 5 o'clock, need the alcohol place. So.
And that's something I noticed with a lot of people that are sober. Is like they replace alcohol or drugs with working out or work or food or whatever. They do replace it. So it's, I mean, I guess it's like harm reduction. It's better than what you were doing, but you're still kind of avoiding why.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly, say you found yourself sober, but now you're struggling with binge eating or sugar addiction or, overworking or whatever it is. All that means is that you need to just go back and do some of the work that we've been talking about today, because it means that you did exactly that. You managed to nix the habit, but you didn't do the work for the lasting change because you've replaced it. And it's super common. Sugar, I think, is probably like the number one, at least for women, that we implement. And I struggle with my eating, and there's exercises that you can do that can be really powerful. And I always recommend, this might just be a good tip for people. It's just kind of like it's a 24-hour exercise. And this applies to anybody struggling with addiction, anybody struggling with anxiety, mental health, you name it. Just for 24 hours, I would ask you to just notice your triggers. Notice those cues, whatever is triggering you to be anxious, triggering you to want the glass of wine, whatever it is. Just notice it. And then once you've noticed it, go ahead and notice the emotion that's attached to that. So if you're triggered at 5 o'clock to have a glass of wine, is it because you're stressed? Is it because you're bored? Is it because you're lonely? Whatever that emotion is tied to it. The third step, and there's 4 steps. The third step is to then just go ahead and notice. Again, we're not asking you to change any behaviors here, but go ahead and notice, what action did you decide to take? Did you have the glass of wine? Did you do the 5-minute meditation? Did you go for a walk? What action did you take based on that trigger and emotion? And then the fourth step is taking it, the final step is to then identify, based on the action that you did decide to take, what emotion did you feel? So say you did have the glass of wine. Now, how do you feel? Maybe you feel worse, right? Maybe you feel more lonely. Maybe you feel sad. Maybe you did the meditation. Maybe you feel relaxed, whatever it is. And the goal of doing this over a 24-hour period of time is to start to understand when your triggers are popping up, right? And ideally, this is something that you do for, longer than 24 hours, so you can start to identify trends in your behavior. So when are your triggers and cues popping up? What is the emotion tied to it? What action are you taking? And what's the emotion tied to the action? Because that is going to, again, set you up to start thinking about how you're going to implement change. Because you're giving yourself your ingredients now. You know what you're dealing with.
Had you ever had thoughts of like, I don't want to ever quit drinking. I just want to be able to be a functional, be social drinker. And
100%. Moderation. It's part of the journey is my opinion on that. So whenever I talk to folks who are trying to moderate, I fully support that, because that is part of their journey, and we don't know where that's going to go for them. By the time I could, quote unquote, successfully moderate, I hated alcohol. Like, it wasn't worth it. I got to the point where I would choose, even one day a week, and it would have to be social. It would have to be with friends. And it was like, by the time the friends came over, I didn't even want it. I was like, this is so stupid, That was my experience with it. But
if I wanted to be a moderate drinker, I was still going to binge.
Yeah.
Like, there's no way I just wanted 1 or 2 drinks.
It's pointless. I would always say it's pointless.
I drink it to get drunk. And it's like, so why would I torture myself that way or have this slippery slope? Or it's like, no, I'm not going to get drunk 5 nights a week. I'm just going to get drunk once. Well, what's the point of that even? So it's funny what our addiction does and what our brain does and tries to trick us. And
it does.
It fights right to it still fights. I still get cravings.
Yeah.
I still have using dreams.
Yeah. Do you?
Yeah. I'm 6 years sober.
Oh, wow.
You don't?
I don't have using dreams. I feel triggered a lot. And I think I was a transfer from alcohol to food person. So I think for me, the alcohol doesn't even register on my radar, but there is that danger of trying to treat my emotions with a substance. So I'm very honest about that. And I have a few tricks that I use when I'm super duper triggered. My go-to emotions are anxiety and anger. So when anger pops in, it's not something I'm proud of, and my family doesn't need to be the recipient of that anger. And so I have a technique that I use it's from the Pomodoro technique, which, if you know it from the business setting, is 20 minutes on, 5 minutes off of a single task. If you want more, just Google it. So I took that concept from using it successfully in my business life to using it personally with my emotions. And so if I am highly triggered by something, my daughter 2 weekends ago was just awful. She's 9 going on 19, so disrespectful. And she said something that just set me right off the edge. And I knew I was about to lose it. And so I marched my butt upstairs, and I grabbed my makeup brushes, and I set my timer for 20 minutes, and I started just cleaning my makeup brushes. So basically the concept is set your timer for 20 minutes, choose a menial task. dishes, laundry, weeding the garden. Don't overthink it. Just do whatever's closer, reorganize your office, whatever. And see how you feel after those 20 minutes. Cravings do not last longer than 20 minutes. They can't. Those triggers cannot last that long. I've even read 3 to 5 minutes. So after 20 minutes, you've reset your heart rate. You've been doing this like totally menial task, and 99.9% of the time you're going to come out of that experience feeling much, whatever the desired result is, right? Much calmer, much more relaxed. And then I was able to take my daughter into the other room and have a nice, calm, civilized chat.
A nice, calm spanking.
Yeah. We do not condone violence. just throwing that out there, making sure that's on the record.
Same. Yes. I was just being a smartass. To this day, I still struggle with anxiety and anger as well. A lot of my anger actually is anxiety. It just comes out as anger. But my depression, and that's partly a male thing, partly my family too. It's like, I see men in my family get angry, and it's like, you're not angry, you're scared, or you're anxious or whatever. But my depression, it's like, it's been almost non-existent since I've been sober. Like I used to spend days in bed and stuff, and now it's like I haven't done that since being sober.
Oh my God.
But my anxiety is still there.
Yeah.
It's a lot more manageable because now I'm sober and trying to deal with anxiety as opposed to hungover or high or drunk and having anxiety.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it's not easy. And I think that's so important to know. There's a lot of truths about sobriety that are sunshine and roses and rainbows. But there's also a lot of truths about sobriety that are just real and raw and kind of ugly. And especially, I don't know if you can relate to this, especially in the first year of sobriety, feeling all of those feelings is a beast and very, very, very challenging. I hear I wish she was a personal mentor, but Mel Robbins, she talks a lot about, don't just envision that end goal. Don't just envision the finish line, like envision the middle, the messy, the suck. I think that's really important with the sobriety journey, to make sure that you're setting yourself up for realistic success. That this journey, and I see it all the time. I see people saying, oh, I'm 2 weeks sober. Like, why don't I feel better? Why am I so tired? Why do I have so much anxiety? Right. The truth is that it's because it sucks sometimes. Right. Mm-hmm. Our bodies have been accustomed to a substance for decades, years, depending on who you are. Changing that does not happen overnight, and it does not happen after 30 days.
No. I remember being told, you have to learn how to feel your feelings. And I thought that was just the most bizarre thing. I was like, I know how to feel. I've been angry. I've been depressed my whole life. It's like, I totally get it. I did not get it at all. Like, once I started, that first year when stuff would come up, I'd be like, oh. One of the hardest emotions for me to feel was content. Actually, my default was misery. I would actually, there was times where I was like, oh man, I think I'm content right now. And then boom, I would my default would set in and be like, wait a minute, I'm feeling content. And then I'd have to spend 3 hours no, why did I do that?
That's so interesting. I can relate to that. Part of the borderline makeup is this idea that typically people who struggle with borderline kind of thrive in this high intensity environment, or you might call them drama queens or whatever, whatever works. And so when things kind of just settle, we just came off of a crazy year. We sold our house in Texas. We moved to Colorado. We got married. We got a puppy. Paul started a new job, all the things, right? It was very hectic for a long time. And we kind of finally settled here in Colorado, and I went into a deep depression. Luckily, I get myself out within about 5 days, but it is this idea of, to what you're saying, this contentment. It was wait a second, there's nothing for me to fix. There's nothing for me to, there's no drama.
Mm-hmm.
And so training my brain to understand how to accept and just be with the moment, the contentment, like accept that, my whole life I've been fight or flight. My whole life I've been making these erratic decisions and then suffering the consequences and then snowball effect. And so to finally just experience like joy and happiness and, freedom is,
Mm-hmm.
it feels uncomfortable at first, as crazy as that sounds, but
It's true. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about specifically?
I just want people to know that there's other ways to tackle their sobriety. And I think like it doesn't have to be just one. Like it's, form your own toolbox. Like my toolbox doesn't look like yours. One of my clients is, she goes to one AA meeting a week. She works with me once a week. And then she has a therapist who specializes in like brain development once a week. And, and then her other kind of, actual tools there too. So I feel like like have fun with it. Enjoy everything that's out there right now because sobriety is super cool right now. It's very on trend. And so take advantage of everything that's out there. Don't feel like you need to pigeon yourself to that one provider or, the one thought process of AA. Put your own toolbox together until it fits for you.
Thank you so much, Louise, for your openness and your candidness and your honesty. I think you are doing wonderful things, helping many, many people. And congratulations on the new podcast. I hope it's a huge success. Just keep it up. You're doing wonderful things for lots of people. So I very, very much appreciate that. Don't forget, next week I'm talking to CC Chang about her past struggles with mental health and a toxic relationship, and also about her company, Sharewell. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media and to leave a review and a rating. And also, don't forget to make your beds and take your meds. Bye.